Sorry. So this is Treat Your Content Right. Can you guys see me okay? I feel like this podium's taller than I am. Okay. So I'm Tiffany Jones-Brown, and I will be speaking today. You can direct or DM me at TickJones if you want. So show of hands, how many people here are content strategists? 2. How many are 2.5? We'll get into that. How many of you would say that maybe you're a content strategist? Sweet. What about web writers? Fiction writers? No. Designers? Developers? Okay. Project managers? Awesome. Okay. Well, hopefully I'll have something to say to each of you, and I'll tell you what I'll be talking about here in a minute. So what is this presentation all about? I'm going to be talking about some basic ways to make your content better, especially your written content, because that's what I focus on and I think it's really important, and why you should. So just a breakdown of what we'll talk about, why taking care of your content is important, how good web writing and content strategy can make your content better, what counts as good web writing, and how to incorporate some basic content care into your redesigns and workflows. So hopefully for all of you designers, this will give you at least some framing concepts to think about. So our goal today, as I said, I want to give you a better understanding of what's happening right now with web writing and content strategy, introduce you to some ideas that probably you've heard of that maybe you'd like to think about some more, some common sense things you can do to make your content better, and then go over some case studies that illustrate my point. And I'll do that a little bit later. So I have to admit my bias a little bit. Personally, I think we can't really think of design without thinking about content. And of course, that means all kinds of content. Of course, you know that you design for content, but a lot of the times I think we don't spend enough time really curating it, thinking about it, making it better. So again, my bias, in my opinion, content is why your website exists. Doesn't really matter what you're designing. Usually you're designing something to put something out into the world that people can see and use. So we'll be talking about that. What is this not about? And this kind of gets to your question that you had for me in the green. Anyways, this won't be about every single aspect of content strategy. Content strategy is a big field, and some of it, I'll break it down a little bit later, but I don't do every single aspect of content strategy, so we're not going to be getting into every single thing, every single deliverable. If you came here for that, I will totally understand if you get up and leave. This is a little bit about user experience and interaction design, but I'm not a designer or a UX professional, so I'm not going to be getting into the particulars, tactics of that. It's not about the death of journalism. You probably didn't come for that. It's not about writing ad copy, even though there is some overlap between copy and web writing. And it's not about content management systems, and it's not about specific technologies. So to reiterate, this talk is not about keywords and SEO optimization, even though I know that's an important part of content strategy. I'm not going to be just telling you how to go nuts with your syndicated content all over the world. So again, if you feel like leaving, we'll totally make up later. It's fine. So this is an overview of ideas, principles, and practical advice for Treat Your Content Right. And sorry, I'm just trying to see. Would you mind turning on that timer? I think it's not on. Thanks. So you guys are going to be here really late. So again, I'm Tiffany Jones-Brown. What do? I work for Things That Are Brown, which is a small design agency in Seattle. I'm a client and communications director, but I do web writing and I do content strategy. I do a lot of different things for Things That Are Brown. I run it with my husband, Matt Brown, actually, who's speaking at 1:30 today on a topic called Running with Wireframes. And then I also run Second and Park, which is my own freelance content strategy and web writing business, and I do that on the side quite a bit. Before I was doing this, I was working with Blue Flavor, which is a wonderful also web design agency in Seattle. I don't know if you've heard of them, but Nick and Kevin will be here at some point. You should say hi to them. They taught me a lot. And then Things That Are Brown, of course, I'm currently the virtual web editor for MIX10 and also for Channel 9, but I didn't get their logo. And actually, Matt and I just recently worked on a redesign of visitmix.com, and we'll get into that case study as an example of sort of a common sense way to do content strategy a little bit later. Before I was doing anything on the internet, though, and this informs a lot of my work, I was actually I was in grad school for ethics, and I learned a lot about philosophy and literature, but it was actually kind of inspiring to get out of that because the writing was terrible, like great ideas, lots of terrible writing, and it kind of actually taught me a lot about what not to do. So does anybody have a question or need to leave before we start? Okay. So let's go. So what is content? This seems like a pretty easy question, but I think we should take time to define it. And I just got back from South by Southwest, and I had a lot of conversations with people while I was there about what content is, and you'd be surprised. So content is the stuff on your site. That's how probably I would define it, because I like to define things like that. What people want to consume, maybe if you're in a more marketing frame of mind, it could be called that. Everything on the internet, it's a different way of thinking about it. Contextualized data, which is, I think, a great way to think about it if you're maybe an information architect or you've been doing something else. It's an interesting way to render the concept. Whatever carries meaning, if you're in kind of a philosophical mood. Everything between your homepage and checkout. I was talking to Ian Alexander of Eat Media. I don't know if you guys know that content strategy company, but that's kind of how he defined it, and he finds that a helpful concept. Web writing, maybe that's how I define it in a certain kind of mood. Or images, audio, video, data, and text, which that's Christina Halverson, who is a content strategist. Definition is probably the most specific and best, I guess, if you're getting specific. But in my opinion, as I said before, content is why your website exists. And design and development's purpose is to support content. Don't rush the stage and kill me, because what I mean by that is not to say that design and development are not important, because clearly they are probably more important than little bits of copywriting on your website. But I just mean to say that really if we're thinking about these concepts, we really need to be thinking along the lines of what is it that we're doing with our design and our development? What questions are we trying to answer? Who are we talking to? What's our content? What's the writing like? Why does it matter to people? And that always helps me orient myself. So we should treat our content right. And that's what this panel is about. Sorry, one second. So I think in order to know how to treat our content right, we also need to know what's wrong with it. So what's wrong with our content? Again, some more concepts. We say that content is king, but it's not. How many of you who are designers or developers or project managers have a content strategist or a writer who's involved in almost every project? You do. Oh, a lot of you do. Awesome. So you probably think this is true. Yeah, I work with a lot of agencies, and I find that a lot of time this isn't the case, which can be fine. Sometimes you don't need a super content-heavy website or a super writing-heavy website, but as much as that mantra is sort of repeated over and over again, it's not always the case that we kind of follow it through and really are thinking about this. We think we're good writers, but we're not. How many of you have, I guess it would be the same ones of you who have people on your site or working on writing on your site every time, but do you have professional writers who you work with? Any of you? You have professional writers? Some of you. So it's crazy because writing is this thing that anybody can do, and especially if you've been doing design and development for a while, it kind of feels like you get it, and you kind of do, right? Like you've been rendering these concepts, you've been thinking through marketing ideas, you really do get it in a way, but it still takes a special set of skills to be able to write really well for the web, and I'll get into that. We bring on writers too late in the process, and I'll get to that a little later when I'm talking more about content strategy, but that's a big deal. I mean, your writers need to understand your discovery process just like you do. They need to be brought in early on, they need to be involved, or at least reading all of this user research that you're doing. And so I push toward that all the time. I just need to know, like, what are these documents that you're going over for design and development. We write our home and about pages, then quit. Content is hard. Writing is extremely hard. There's a whole huge process involved in doing it well. And just like a great design, you really have to drill down into these tiny little details in order to get it right. But sometimes I find with some of my clients that they're focusing on these main chunks, which is great in the sense that they're economizing. But what really makes good content on a site is what you do throughout the entire site. We think that copywriting and web writing are the same thing. How many of you would say maybe you think copy and web writing are interchangeable? You could be honest. Just one person. You guys are geniuses. 2 people. They're not the same thing. We often call copy on the web copy because it is that. But if we're thinking through the concepts involved in this, copywriting we associate with marketing, we associate with ads, we associate it with old school marketing in particular. Web writing is a bit different. You have to be a good copywriter, but you also have to understand a lot of other things, and I'll get into that as well. We don't think words matter. I'm sure that none of you would say that you don't think words matter, but a lot of the time I think we don't give enough credence to how powerful words are for our branding, for our identity, for communicating what we're trying to communicate to our users. Words have a lot of power. And we don't view ourselves as publishers. I think one of the things I've noticed almost the most is that designers and developers, and me too even, you tend to think like we're creating a website, like we're doing discovery, or we're doing strategy. But really, if you reposition yourself a little bit and you start to think about it, we are really publishing, and you start thinking of yourself as a publisher, that really changes your relationship to your content. It makes you think about things like, how much of this are we going to create? When's it going to go out? How are we going to manage it? And you start having all these other concerns that I think are great to have. But the biggest problem, I think, with our content is that we don't have a strategy. And there's been a lot of talk about content strategy lately. As I was saying, I was at South by Southwest just a few days ago, and I think the years previous there were probably no panels at all on content strategy, and this year there were, I think, 4 or 5. So it's becoming a big deal. Have you guys been reading up on content strategy and sort of like all this new writing that's coming out about it? Anybody feel like got your Kevin who's got his finger on the pulse of humanity? So it's a big problem, and everybody right now is sort of getting hot and bothered about content, and there's a reason for it. So at the risk of boring you with more definitions, I'm going to give you some more definitions because I think they're important. So definitions. This is the first definition that I'm going to read to you is from this book, which is Christina Halvorson's book, Content Strategy for the Web. And Christina has done a pretty amazing job at bringing content strategy, which is sort of this nebulous concept, into the public eye. It was already happening, but she's really doing it. If you don't have this book, I recommend that you get it. Even if you're a developer, I think it's an excellent book for understanding how to think about the web and writing for the web and managing content for the web. So Christina Halvorson's definition is content strategy plans for the creation, delivery, or publication, and governance of useful, usable content. So if you were to break that down just a tiny bit, creation, who's going to write it, who's going to make it, whether we're talking about writing or video or whatever, who's actually going to be doing this content. Delivery and publication, how's it going to get out, what's the calendar, do we have a calendar, do we care? Governance, who's going to maintain it over time, and this becomes especially important for non-static content. Obviously, your blog, your social media, those kind of things are particularly important to govern well. And then useful and usable. Useful, do people care? Is it relevant? Does your audience know why they're there? Can they get what they're looking for? And then usable. Do you know are you a web writer who gets design basically? Do you know user experience? Can people use your content to get something done? And I think this is one of the better, well, I think there are a lot of good definitions, but I think this is probably been the most helpful for me for doing my job. And then another one, uses words and data to create content that supports meaningful interactive experiences. So I think the thing I'd like to focus on there is just meaningful interactive experiences. That's another way that you would distinguish web writing, is that it is in this sort of overall experience of somebody being in your website. And so it has to support that, and meaningful just meaning, do people care about it? Again, is it relevant to them? But maybe you could also just say, it keeps your content from sucking. And that's how I like to think of it a lot of the time. So how do you think like a content strategist? One second. Actually, does anybody have any questions before I go on? No? Pretty straightforward. Good. So have a long-term plan for your content. And this gets back to this idea of governance. You need to, even if you're just doing static content on a website, you need to know who's going to be there to manage it when your products change, who's going to update your product descriptions, who's going to update your tagline when you do a rebranding exercise, who are you thinking you might hire to do that? If you have a blog that's a well-trafficked blog, or you want it to be more well-trafficked, who's going to edit that? How often are you going to publish? Who's going to be involved? And that's kind of one of the cornerstones of content strategy. So content strategy is part of the design process. This is, I think, probably, since I've been doing this has been one of the most important things for me to learn. Seems like a lot of disciplines, information architecture, content strategy, design, people don't think of them as that porous, mostly because you need to become a specialist, and that's very important to be good at what you do. But it's actually, I think, better if we sort of imagine content strategy as being part of this whole world of what we're doing with our website. So it kind of overlaps with information architecture. It overlaps with design. Content strategists need to be working with designers, and we need to not think of these disciplines as being completely walled off from one another. I don't know why people think that, but maybe some territorial things, some just needing to be good at what you do and trying to really focus on the how and the tactics of what you're doing, keep people from kind of looking outwards and saying, okay, so I created this great set of wireframes, or I did this great job on this sitemap, but did I consult somebody who's thinking about these issues related to content? And we work a lot on that at Things That Are Brown. Matt and I'll get into this in some of the case studies, but we actually do a ton of overlap between our process. Our process is not that linear. It can be, but I'm part of the design process. He's part of the content strategy process. I create writing that then gets changed after the design has happened. And so there's a lot of, and I have to do wireframes and sitemaps when I need to, even though I'm not an expert IA, which Matt helps me with and other folks help me with. So that kind of gets to my next point. Write for design and design for writing. Just like we can't separate these disciplines, I think, into these really specific categories, I don't think we can separate our writing from our design. So I don't know how everybody's process works, but what I find a lot of times is that people come to me and they just have maybe some rough sketches of what they want to do, or maybe they have some wireframes. And they say, okay, write this content for this space. And so they've given me a space constraint, which is nice. Maybe they've even given me access to their strategy or branding guidelines. And maybe I have all the information I need. And so I feel good about it. But I start writing, and then the writing gets put into the design later, and I realize the visuals and the writing just don't come together to tell a great story. And I don't think you have to just be, I think there's this misconception maybe that you have to have like this really cute, fun site in order to be the kind of site that's doing like great visual and content storytelling together, or visual and writing storytelling together. But I don't think that's true. I think these two need to be together. And I think the process, it's very helpful for me when I do both in the process. So there's this book by this guy named David Barringer. I don't know, are any of you familiar with him? He's a designer, but he's also a writer, and he does a lot of writing about design. And he has this sort of great quote about this idea. So this is kind of a weird example in a way, because he is talking about like how liberal magazines aren't designed in a liberal way, and kind of talking about how you can like use design to embody certain principles. But the point that he says, and I think this is a great point, is that and this is just his opinion, American editors must believe that while stories look like frogs on the page, when kissed by the reader, they become princes in the mind. But a reader has to work up the nerve to kiss a frog. And so that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's like you have this like amazing content. Maybe you got some brilliant, journalist, copywriter, whoever to write it for you. But if you don't design it and it doesn't fit within this larger world of your website and your design, it is like kissing a frog for your readers, and we don't want to make them do that. Less is more, except when more is more. So in general, if there's a way to cut down on all and any crap that you're dealing with, I think most of us agree that that's the case, and that's what everybody talks about right now. And I was actually just in a really good presentation by Kevin and D.L. Byron that was talking a lot about this. It was called Design for the Ordinary, like this fixie. So they're talking about minimalism in design and why that's important. I think the same is true of content, except when it's more useful to have more content. So if you need more writing, if you need more space to get your message across in the right way, then take that liberty. I think that not boxing ourselves into these sort of conceptual frameworks and not letting ourselves get out of them is good. And then write well. I think I'll get into this a little bit more, but you need to be a good writer. You can't just have anybody writing a bunch of stuff on your site. I mean, you can, but it might not be that good. And I think that's just a general thing to keep in mind. Questions before I move on? Nobody? Okay. So this is what I'm trying to talk about, again, at the risk of going through too many more definitions. This is kind of what we were talking about at the beginning, that there are many different kinds of content strategists, and we need to be able to understand the difference before we know how to think of our design projects. So come on now. Okay, so the ones in pink are really what I do. Web writing, which is making useful, usable writing on your site. Messaging and branding, that's kind of creating the story behind your site. What do you want your readers or your users to understand about your business? That's messaging. And editorial strategy, so I can help you with your calendars and your publishing calendar and all that. But there's all kinds of other stuff. Information architecture, I'm sure you all know what that is. Search engine optimization strategy, I'm sure you know what that is. Content channel distribution strategy, how you're going to get your content out and where. Metadata strategy, kind of the data behind the data of your content. And then content management. So what kind of content management system is going to work best for your particular needs? A lot of people say, like, if you call yourself a content strategist, you probably need to know all of these. And I think that's true. But I think it's probably impossible for one person to be a specialist in all of these. And so at different points in the life cycle of your business, you may need one or the other. And I think it's important to just remember to ask what kind of content strategist you're dealing with before you accidentally hire a web writer to do your content management system. And the thing is, I've actually had this happen to me before. I thought I'd scope this particular project well. But actually, it turned out that they were looking for me to seed all of the content into their content management system. Same issues with content and writing. The same issues that happen with design projects and feature creep and all those kind of scope issues. So be sure to familiarize yourself with, if you're on the client side, be sure to familiarize yourself with what these things are. If you're on the writer or content strategist side, be sure to familiarize yourself with what you're not doing. So they're not the same. And as I said, know what kind you're hiring. So I'm going to skip through some of this a little fast. Let me just see. I can't tell how much time we actually have. Hold on. Okay. So web writing starts with good writing, as I've mentioned. And there's a book that I really, really like. It's called On Writing Well. And it's a book, of course, that's outside of it's not about web writing, but I think the same principles really apply. And I think if you have a chance, pick it up. Even if you're a designer, the same principles that apply in this book apply to design. So I think it's a wonderful start. The 4 concepts in here are the 4 principles that Zinsser talks about: simplicity, brevity, humanity, and clarity. And I think, again, those are design principles as well. So simplicity. This actually could probably fit under a lot of these categories, but this is Canon's site. If you want to go in, this is their About page. So, it's not horrible, but there may be adjectives. Our extensive product line and digital solutions enable businesses and consumers worldwide to capture, store, and distribute information. Like, not the worst sentence in the world, kind of jargony. You can't quite tell if it's not simple enough or if that adjective isn't working or what. But for the sake of simplicity, all you might do is change it to this. And, I would maybe even remove some of those links, but of course probably somebody would tell me that they all need to be there, in which case maybe I would put them in a bulleted list. But this is really the only stuff that you need to know. And depending on the voice and tone and the messaging, you might have to add in some other details. But there's no use in this. This just takes up your whole page. Nobody cares about reading it at all. People just get kind of like, oh, they feel like they're talking to corporate speak when they read it. So simplicity. There's this other book called When You Catch an Adjective, Kill It, I think it's by Ben Yagoda. It's really good. This is actually a Mark Twain quote that I couldn't find the rest of that Mark Twain quote, but it's great. It's just about, can you remove stuff? Can you keep it more simple? Do it. So brevity, this is totally not a web-related example, but I thought of it earlier today. Rushing, Bob hastily obtained a sandwich from the vendor of his choice, or Bob grabbed a sandwich. And it depends on who you're talking to, of course, which way you would say that, but you don't necessarily need, you don't need the adverbs, you don't need to put all this other stuff in there. Keep the writing simple, keep the way you think about the writing simple. So humanity. This is probably obviously you couldn't have a lot of humanity at the expense of everything else, but this is one of my favorite concepts. So Twitter, I feel like you have to talk about Twitter. This is just the error page. Something is technically wrong. Thanks for noticing. We're going to fix it up and have things back to normal soon. Like, these aren't the most brilliant sentences ever, but saying something is technically wrong is a really cute rendering of this sentence, and it's a really cute rendering of the concept. So I think it gives you this feeling like you don't mind. There are lots of other sites that do the same thing. This is a list apart. I think it's funny. There's actually not a ton right here on humanity, but I really like this. This is under the topics, under content and writing. How to write good, ERP, writing to communicate, writing ready for the web, copy as user interface. It's not even like super hilarious, but it gives you this sort of feeling of comfort and relaxation, and it humanizes. It doesn't just say, here's our section on our content and on our writing. And then Wufoo. Do any of you guys use Wufoo for forms and all that? One person. They do. I think it's just this guy, but he does a really good job with these little moments. He has all these philosophy quotes in there. And again, this might not work for your site. This isn't going to work for Canon, but the idea is, I think, firm. So such seems your beauty still. This is the theme designer area. And then robots are typically used to do the tasks that are too dirty, dangerous, difficult, repetitive, or dull for humans. Chris is Wufoo's robot. So it's somebody who works for them. So again, those little moments make a big difference, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes on a case study. I would call that microcopy, but I think microcopy is huge for the trustworthiness of your site and the experience that people have when they're on it. So think about that. Think about designing, even if you're not the writer, think about designing those things in your mind. And then clarity. This is totally an academic example, and I'm sorry I used it, but I just read it while I was in school, and I was like, it killed me. I won't even read you all of this. It won this worst sentence award, actually. I'll just read you the first part. The move from a structuralist account in which capital is understood to structure social relations in relatively homologous ways to a view of hegemony in which power relations are subject to repetition, convergence, and rearticulation brought the question blah, blah, blah. Like, that's horrible. But that's like real writing in a real publication that is really out there and getting like real press. And it's all over the web and like corporate speak. I mean, nobody's going to, that sentence was like this long. They're like this long. But still, you need to reduce jargon, except when you don't need to reduce jargon. And the only time you don't need to reduce jargon is if it helps people understand what you're talking about. But most of the time, you don't need that much jargon. Why? Jargon is confusing. Nobody knows what you mean. It's defensive. Usually the reason you use jargon is because you're trying to like back away from what you're saying. You like don't know what, I do this. It's like you don't know what you want to say about your company or whatever, so you just kind of like add in all these words, and before you know it, your meaning is lost. Because it doesn't establish any connection with your audience, it really alienates people. And it was kind of in that like that Canon example, pretty mundane, simple examples, not hurting anybody's feelings, but you know, you're kind of like, ugh, I don't know what anybody's doing. I think I have a blank slide. So how do we write well? Well, as I said, you could follow those 4 principles, or you can also think of this concept. Treat people well. Like, you know, you're not there to talk about yourself so much. You know, you're at a party and you want to listen and you want to only say what's necessary and those kind of things. Or write to connect. So always keep that in your mind. You're writing and designing in order to connect with human beings. So think of how you would talk. And that's not always going to make your writing great because you're probably going to need to edit it a billion times. But think of how you would talk. Think of how you get people to enjoy your company. That's a good way of thinking about the writing on your site. This is sort of a mixture of writing and design, or interaction design, but I think it's great. It's this little... Is that a timer? I don't think it is. No, okay. So this is like this little message you get if you wrote something like, you know, I'm sending you, or I've sent you, blah, 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 in your email. It sends you this little message. It's, did you mean to attach files? You wrote, I've attached in your message, but there are no files attached. Send anyway? Like that's a great user experience. And it's a great little bit of writing, even though it's totally not designed at all. But the way it lives within this interaction that somebody's having with trying to send this email is really, really good. So again, to reiterate my point, it's not about you. Like your homepage isn't about you. Your about page isn't about you. It's about your readers or users. So web writing. As I said before, it's a user experience problem. The other day I said this and somebody was like, don't call it a problem, call it an area of opportunity. So it's a user experience area of opportunity. And so therefore, web writers need to have a grasp of user-centered design, usability, IA, and all of that. And again, this just goes back to the idea that you're not hiring just a copywriter. You're hiring somebody who, you know, gets the basics or can go find out the basics of user-centered design. Not copywriting, not journalism. And I actually want to make this point real quick because nobody really thinks that web writing is journalism. But I think there is something to learn from journalism for web writing. And as the web sort of is re-adopting these principles from print, I think we'll see this a little bit more. Journalists do a great job of introducing context and introducing the how and the why and the what of what's going on. So I think we'll see a little bit more of that. So again, web writing, 2 purposes. You want to quickly communicate who you are and what you have to offer. So this is also Wufoo. It's just a different part of it. I don't know if this is the best design in the world, but I think this sentence right here is excellent, like this, because it does such a good job of being good writing, but also speaking to technical people while not being too technical. So it says, our HTML form builder helps you create contact forms, online surveys, and invitations so you can collect the data, registrations, and online payments you need without writing a single line of code. I think that's an excellent sentence. It's like simple. It communicates what they do and who they are. It's not the first thing on the page, but it makes it clearer than a lot of other sites I've seen to do things. And then, of course, in order to help people do stuff. This is Tumblr. And just a tiny bit of writing there, but sometimes the writing just needs to get out of the way of the design. And so you see here, all it says the easiest way to blog, which is great, I think. Maybe that's true. And then it just says email address, password, URL. You can change this at any time. It works with the design and it works with the functionality of the site to really get something, to help people get something done. And then, of course, oh, interesting. Sorry, guys, it's like, one second. So again, just a reminder, who are these people who you're trying to help out? These are busy, goal-oriented scanners of information. So that's what you need to keep in mind with your designs and your development. That's what you need to keep in mind with your writing. So I'm going to go into some case studies here in a minute. But any questions before I do? Totally fine if not. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 2 case studies. One is Second and Park, which is my site for my freelance business. I feel bad kind of talking about it, but I think I'm not trying to pitch you on it. I just think it's a good example of having to do something from scratch where you think about all these issues of messaging and the rest of content strategy. So that's why I'm talking about that. And then I'll talk about MIX Online, which is visit MIX.com, which Matt and I designed all together. So Second and Park. We had to do this from scratch, so we had to answer all of these business questions, like business model questions were what we were going after. So who am I? What are my services? What's my niche? Why should people hire me? And even though that's for like my business, what I was doing, those are business model questions, those are the kinds of questions that you also need to understand, even if you're just working with designers on the redesign of a client site or working with writers on the redesign of a client site. Those are the types of things to tap into. So let's look at a little bit of this in action. So how we dealt with that. Messaging, voice, and tone. So this is like the front page, and we really focus on that first message a lot, the looking for the right words. We just made sure, one of the things that people say about copywriting is that it's finding the perfect message with the perfect words, and that's a pretty typical way, or that's a pretty typical definition. So even though I'm not a copywriter, I tapped into that since most of what I'm doing is writing. And then the tone and voice, it's kind of like, whimsical but professional, clear, approachable. And then the writing on it is succinct and clear, so focused on that a lot. And then audience. I had to think about who my audience was and what I was doing. For me, my audience is mostly web design agencies, so I made sure to call that out. Can't get content from your client, don't want to write it all by yourself. I'm not saying that will work for everybody, but I think the idea there was just to make sure we did call out an audience. And I even went so far as to create a pitch page for that. And it's kind of under this like landing page concept, I think, but we really just focused on that. I didn't want to be working with people whose backgrounds that I didn't really understand or whose industries I didn't really understand. And then there's the micro copy, which I talked about earlier, and again, which I still think is immensely important for the personality and the trust of the site. So we just did little things like this here. This like project management monster guy. Where's my content? I could use a cookie. I mean, obviously, if you work for Canon, you're not going to be writing this kind of stuff. But those are the kind of the moments that I think, people commented on that a ton on my site. They liked it a lot. It made them feel good. And then like little things on the contact form. There's no more text than that. And it gets out of the way, but it's still this little bitty piece of goodness. And then once you submit, this little thing, like super simple, not genius, just it worked, we'll be in touch before you know it. That I think it gives people these little guideposts along the way to know, who are you, what are you about, am I still at the same place? And that level of detail, just like it's a good level of detail for your designs, it's a good level of detail for your writing. You need to be thinking about these tiny things. The other thing to note is that all of this would be totally different if we didn't style it visually. If it was just like 12-point font and some like maybe other images, it wouldn't have the same impact at all. So the visual language is really important there. As I said, the real story is design and writing together. So I just went over this. So a bit about process. I was talking earlier about how it's really important for designers and writers and content strategists to all understand each other fairly well. Well, and this project was really, really collaborative. This looks like me collaborating with my cat, but that's not. I was more collaborating with Matt on this than my cat. But we did all kinds of collaborative things and offline things to get this done. We, as I mentioned before, we don't follow. I mean, we do follow a linear, structured process, but we don't make ourselves stick there if we don't need to. So I would do things like we would, sort of do this strategy, and then I would do some writing, and then I would like cut out the writing and move around a page just to get my mind around it. And then Matt would do some designs, and then I would start putting the copy or the writing into the designs, and then we'd go back to the drawing board. So it was just a lot of iterations, and it worked really, really well for us. And that's actually another point, and I think Matt might talk about this in his presentation, is just the idea to not take, for your writing or for your design, all of your inspiration off the internet. Like, you go to the CSS galleries and you're like, oh, that's so, beautiful site. But I think it's really helpful to get away from the computer when you're doing your discovery process. So for that site, I got like inspiration from the wallpaper on my favorite restaurant. It still, fits into this user-centered design, but I think it's definitely okay to get offline, and it gets you more inspired and thinking independently too about what to say. And then the last point about this is I think that site would probably make a lot of people who worked at big organizations bristle, just because it's like, who's going to create a tiny little 2-page site for my organization? But again, I do think you can make these things work for your organization. You just have to find ways of incorporating little bits and pieces of collaboration and microcopy and outside inspiration into your workflow. And I'll talk about that in a bit. It just doesn't have to be the same voice and tone. So one business I think that did this, that we were able to do this on, was the MIX Online redesign. And I'll skip to a slide first, but I think for this project really was all about working content strategy into a design project organically. And this is Nishant's, he was a project manager, but this is his visualization. I hope it's okay that I use that. But this is his visualization of his workflow, and he was working really hard, so maybe this is sort of crazy, but I think this is kind of awesome. Like, you can just see how everything, like, here's process, taking care of process, here's research that happened here, here's like content strategies in there somewhere. It actually didn't end up being a huge part of the project, and I think that's a really important point, that sometimes things don't end up being as huge as you think they will be, which is good. So you see, like, this is just a totally fluid. I mean, we had a structure, we had a timeline, we met our timeline, we met our budget, but this was a really pretty fluid process as it turned out, and I'm glad that Nishant kept all that data. So how do we do it? Well, first there was this rapid discovery. As I mentioned, MIX Online, I was hired as a content strategist, Matt as a designer, me as a web writer, but for this particular project, they already had a really good sense of their business goal. They had all this writing that they were doing. It was really good writing. They knew the things that they were trying to promote. It was these articles, open source prototypes, lab notes. So they knew what they were doing already. So I didn't have to spend much time on the business model, but I did spend some time in rapid discovery where I did this standard content strategy thing. So I did a content audit, even though Nishant and the team had already done that, I'm sure. I did a content audit. I did a competitor analysis where I just looked at other people's stuff to see, not like what are they doing that we're not doing, but what's the terrain, and where does MIX fit in to this terrain. And then I did information architecture review. So out of that, well, actually before we did the information architecture review and out of the discovery phase came this goal. the site needed to be content-focused and bold, unique, and trustworthy. And those sound kind of buzzwordy, but if you put it at the end of a discovery process, that actually is quite meaningful. And that was kind of what I focused on as I was doing my writing. Another illustration of this sort of organicness of this process is that when Nishant created the wireframes, which I was meant to review as well as Matt and some other folks, they were functional wireframes. And these are his instructions to us. And I think these were wonderful and very helpful to me. I'll try to just kind of skip to bits. While these wireframes look and feel like typical wireframes, there's one fundamental difference. Functional wireframes simply assert the information that will be displayed on any given page and nothing more. They don't make any guarantee with regards to layout and positioning of that information. And then he goes on to sort of he went on to show us, like, this is the stuff that is really like high, we want it there, medium, and low, and then gives us instructions. So this is really helpful for both Matt and I, because when I was reviewing the wireframes, I could see, some of the content requirements are flexible. I could talk to Matt. We could kind of think through like what might need to change. And so we weren't boxed into this really linear process. And then, so from that came the site, which I don't have all of the pages from the site, but I do have these. And as I said, we wanted to focus on making this like bold and unique and trustworthy. Matt did that with the design, but even with the writing, these little bits and pieces, there are actually 3. You can't really see these well, but you can see how the writing is prioritized. Like, it has a place. There's not a ton of it, and every little piece was edited like a billion times. Like even this sentence, insights from our team and other industry pros. It probably took maybe 7 revisions to get that right from my end. But what is there is pretty bold and pretty straightforward. It's positioned on the page in a bold way, and it doesn't make outlandish claims. But I think this was one way that we did it, was let the writing and the copywriting shimmer through. Same with the micro copy was also important on this site. And sorry, I'm just going to make sure I know what time it is. It's time for me to almost be done. So one more bit of microcopy. These are little bits from the site. We really focus on these details. In black and white, Mix Online and Friends write about everything from web strategy and design to content and code. And then these are their labs. A lot of effort went into every single one of those little parts. And I'm going to skip through some of these. Same with the content form, even the little places that you can't see very well. Speak your mind, but please be kind. Those are the little elements that help. So that was the thing that we really focused on microcopy. And then, of course, be flexible and don't be afraid of the organic stuff was what we really kept in mind that whole time. So we've run out. I think we don't actually have as much time as I thought we have. We have like 8 minutes. So I'm going to skip through some practical concerns because I think I've talked about it a lot, and just go straight to these lessons and then let you ask questions, and you're more than welcome to ask me questions about that practical stuff. So how do we treat our content right? Respect it. It's not just a decoration. It's probably not going to cost as much as your design and your development, and that's totally fine, but make it a part of your design process. Hire the right kind of writer. Make sure that you know what kind of content strategist you've got, or do it yourself and just make sure you're familiar with all the concepts that you need to know. If you bring on a strategist, bring him or her on early. Let her or him be a part of your discovery process. Let her or him see your design comps. Just make sure they're integrated into the process just like everybody else. Focus on useful. Cut anything that doesn't matter, always. Write well. Just make sure you get the basics of writing. It's not just grammar. It's about the simplicity, brevity, humanity, and everything else. Have a plan. That's a content strategy. And design for writing and write for design. I think that's probably one of the things that's being tacked on, or people are starting to think about this a lot more, which is why I've tacked it on to the end. So I think I should probably open it up for questions because we don't have a lot of time. But thank you so much for listening to me for 53 minutes. Do you guys have any questions? Anybody? Any takers? Yes.
task type information, a mix of editorial type information, some personality pieces, some corporate communication pieces?
Well, if the content strategist you're dealing with is a web writer, I would say that he or she needs to understand how to do all of those things and just break it down into different chunks in his or her own process. But that's something that I'm regularly responsible for, all those types of items. So you do need to be able to understand like copywriting, the messaging. You do need to understand how to write good links and to understand where the information is going to be received and how people are coming to the site. I think you said task focus, you said like about pages. They need to be, I mean, I think a good web writer should understand how to do all of those things. And ideally, if they've been part of a good discovery process, you should be able to work with them to create all of that content. So I think, but again, if you're dealing with a person who specializes in SEO, he or she might not be able to do all that work. Does that answer your question? Okay. Good. Anybody else? Yes?
Any thoughts on a site where content is like 80% user generated?
Yeah, I don't work on a lot of sites like that, but I was in a panel at South by Southwest and somebody asked that same question. And one of my panelists gave a wonderful answer, I thought. He said that really what you need to focus on a lot is like you're not going to be able to edit all your user-generated content, but the voice of the person who is managing all of that, the community manager, needs to be consistent and needs to be tied to your company's sort of brand guidelines. And that's a part of content strategy that I didn't really touch on too much. But if your company has good branding guidelines and good, it doesn't even have to be style guides, but a good sense of what the voice is, it should definitely, like the way you respond to those things should be tied to that. Beyond that, without editing the comments, I don't know. Yeah.
How to express the value of your work in terms of efficiency, like A/B tests, like look at the efficiency of this form or whatever, this this page compared to another one with a text, in terms of efficiency of businesses and everything. Because I think it has as big as an impact as usability.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And if I were selling it to somebody, I would probably say, instead of saying like communicate well, treat your users right, I would probably say this makes people like get past your dumb stuff onto the awesome stuff faster, because it's true. Like, how long does somebody spend reading a crappy, ton of text? How long does somebody spend? It's like a bad email that you get. You get a bad email from somebody who didn't edit it, and it takes you like 3 questions to figure out what they meant. And the same is true of bad web writing. It totally slows the process down, and that's a specialized skill to be able to say these little simple things in a way that helps people understand fully what you're talking about. Did anybody else? I thought I saw somebody. Yes?
Do you have any thoughts on creating multilingual sites in the same content you made in language?
Yeah, I sort of purposefully left that out because that's not what I do. But that's definitely a branch of content strategy. Brain Traffic, in the book I was telling you about, this guy, she talks a lot about that, and I wish I could say more, but I really don't do that, except to say just that whoever is doing the translation needs to be a good writer and understand user experience. And I think that's the bottom line for all of it. If you have like a translator just doing like these automatic things, then probably a really good editor. It's just a matter of having somebody who has attention to the writing on your website, no matter what, from whatever end. I wish I could be more technical than that, but I'm not.
A comment, in my opinion, you can't just translate this stuff because the tone and
Exactly.
the language is so different. So
Yeah.
If you just use the translator.
I don't know. I completely agree with you, and I don't know how that works for a lot of sites because I haven't seen a lot of sites that have been translated, but I can imagine like the books that I've read that have been poorly translated or just sort of like directly translated don't carry the message. And that's why I think we do need to have web writers. You don't necessarily have to have one on staff all the time, but it's part of the process. So, yeah. Anybody else? We have go ahead.
What's your opinion on the content that's automatically generated, specifically like a search engine, like say Bing or Google? What's your opinion on how that's done?
Well, I don't know if I have an opinion about it, just because it's probably a lot of it's technical. But I will say this: I mean, if whoever is putting that content out, or whatever instrument is putting that content out, needs to be thinking of these same principles. It needs to be brief. It needs to be simple. It needs to not be really long and jargony and not make any sense. As far as the process of doing that, though, I don't know if I have enough expertise to really talk about that process. I wish I could, but I could refer you to somebody who would know more than me. I can't tell if I'm over time. Am I over time? Oh, you have a question. You're not telling me to leave. Go ahead. Well, I think if you're talking about, if you're at the point where you're figuring out what the content is about, and you're figuring out what technical features are going to support that content, I think you got to know about it. You have to know how that all fits together. But somebody actually said, you're probably, not all clients are going to be able to afford a content strategist and an IA, or a content strategist and an IA, and you're not going to be able to make this process perfect. But as much as you can, I think if I didn't know what the site was about doing, like what are the technical requirements of this site? Even if I'm not writing for those technical requirements, if I didn't know what those were, I wouldn't have the right context in which to produce good communication. So it's not that you need to have somebody in on those technical, you don't need so many meetings that you're going to puke, but you do need somebody who's on top of that, not just somebody who you call at the last minute to generate a bunch of writing on the fly, if that answers your question. And also one other thing is that I've heard a lot of people say lately, and I think if Nick Fink were in the audience, he would probably rush the stage, but I have heard a lot of people talking about how much content strategy and IA are kind of becoming one and the same. So I think you'll see a lot of these disciplines start to merge and have porous boundaries. Anything else? Well, thank you guys so much for listening to me this entire time. You're patient and lovely audience. Thank you.